Join me today as we talk about X-Men 97's season finale, episode 10, Tolerance is Extinction, part 3. Welcome to the Geek Cabal channel. My name is Bobby, and today we're going to be talking about X-Men 97, episode 10, which is the season finale and is called Tolerance is Extinction, part 3. So if you haven't seen my videos, or if you haven't been watching the show, check out my videos in the last couple episodes to get the whole story arc here. And feel free to check out the others. And as I mentioned in the previous video, I am going to do a wrap-up video in a week or two where I talk about the whole thing now that it's all out there, implications going forward, things like that, because there's a bunch of subtle things, and then there's like the sledgehammer at the end of this episode of like, here's where we're going in the next season, if the next season happens, which I'll mention that here momentarily. So anyway, season finale, big stuff happens. Episode 9 ends with the cliffhanger of Wolverine's had the adamantium torn out of him by Magneto. President Kelly is probably going to initiate the Magneto protocols. Jean is probably dead fighting Cable. And Bastion has powered up a whole bunch of Sentinels. So all kinds of bad things are happening. And the episode opens with a flashback to Xavier and Magneto, presumably their first meeting or close to it, where Xavier reveals that he has powers to Magneto, and Magneto to him, reveals he has powers. So, and Magneto is already heavily disillusioned at what humanity will do when they discover these things. So, it turns out that they're actually inside Magneto's head. And Xavier is trying to reason with him, because if he can't, he's going to have to forcefully take control. And his fear is that he could break Magneto's mind and his own in the process. So, and there's comic precedent for that being the outcome. Because that was how the Fatal Attraction storyline ended, with Magneto being turned into a vegetable and laying the seeds for a far worse threat a few years later. And we'll speculate on that, and probably in the other video. I'll briefly mention it here, though. It ultimately led to Onslaught, but there were several other steps that were necessary, too. Now, it's the cartoon. They don't have to take those same steps. They've clearly willing to just mishmash storylines to their heart's content, which it makes things interesting. So, Xavier realizes he's not going to be able to reason with Magneto, and forcefully uses Magneto's powers to restore the magnetic field on Earth, and all the electricity turns back on, which then causes all the Prime Sentinels to turn back on. And then we see Bastion, who, presumably because he had to merge with a bunch of machinery to activate the big Sentinels, he now has a more comic accurate appearance, where he has more mechanical bits showing. And his later appearances is what he looks like. And but then Jean shows back up as the Phoenix out of nowhere, and she reassembles the thing to put onto Bastion's head to block him from controlling the Prime Sentinels. And once that happens, they all shut down. Now, it's worth noting that out of nowhere, several of the Prime Sentinels actually look the way they're supposed to, because they're not just supposed to look kind of like zombies. They're supposed to have an outfit similar to Bastion's and what Valerie Cooper was wearing, with like the pink kind of triangular neck thing with like the 3 gold bars down here on the torso. And kind of randomly, like half of them seem to be like that, and half of them still seem to be the zombies looking ones. So that's a thing. Didn't really go anywhere, but I just thought I'd point that out. And this episode has cameos galore. We get Iron Man, Captain America, Daredevil, Peter Parker and Mary Jane, I believe it's T'Challa, and the Silver Samurai again, and I'm sure there's all kinds of others I'm missing. I'm going to rewatch the episode, probably write them all down. But there's some interesting ramifications for some of these, and I'll get to those here in a moment. But yeah, so the Prime Sentinels get shut down. Bastion is, all pissed off that his powers are, those part of his powers can't work, but the rest still work. And now he's, hurtling energy blasts and all kinds of other stuff. Oh, Jean also, before the Phoenix departs, burns away all the mutant DNA in Mr. Sinister that he's co-opted to keep himself going. And he just becomes like a disheveled old man and kind of runs away. Now, if he's in sync with his comic form, then that's just one of his clones, so it's not going to matter, but we'll see. And Cable, once that happens, his control over Cable gets broken. We also found out Cable tried 200 times to stop Madeline's death on Genosha. So, because Mr. Sinister forces him to answer the question. And Bastion kind of waxes poetically that had he actually taken up Xavier's offer, now he'd be there trapped by the Sentinels too. Because I think he's understanding that he's also a mutant. And he has some comments towards the very end that I'm going to mention. And so yeah, because they try to appeal to his humanity, and he's like, he tells them, like, I didn't ask to be born this way. I didn't ask for these visions, these memories, and these abilities. And, Storm's like, well, no one asks to be born. It's like, it's what you do with it. And he's like, trying to appeal to my humanity, huh? And so he's not going for it. Then, once his control over the Sentinels is broken, he, hang on just a moment, folks. I'm parked, and there's some interesting things in the background. I'm going to edit this part of the video out, probably. So, he grabs Cable's arm and tears it off of him to, like, merge the technovirus into himself. And then he takes on, it looks like he's turning into the Nimrod form, but what he does is he takes on the form of that he has in, I want to say the Second Coming storyline, where the group, a group of anti-mutant people find Bastion's head in the government facility, and they have a Nimrod body from another timeline, and they put it on, and he fuses into it. And initially he just kind of looks like himself, but as it progresses, he becomes more and more metallic looking, more Nimrod looking, and eventually grows giant razor sharp wings. So he does all this and then takes off into space to go kill Magneto to stop that threat once and for all. And so those X-Men are just kind of stuck there. So Forge and Beast start trying to modify a Sentinel to fly them into space. And Jean, the Phoenix, kind of disappears, and I think Cable does call her mom, or she calls him son, one of the two. So they take off. Well, they don't take off. They're going to wait for the robot. And but Bastion takes off, and he gets up there, and President Kelly decides to activate the Magneto protocols. And Captain America, like, T'Challa says something. I had to rewatch the episode to get exactly what he said, but I think he said something along the lines of, only history could be fooled into believing that we're going to do the right thing here. Basically saying, let's not nuke Asteroid M. And Steve Rogers, Captain America, is like, we should listen to T'Challa on this one. Like, we don't know what's going to happen when we do this. Because they don't. And also, I think what Rogue said to him earlier got to him. But that's about all the pushback he has. But he definitely has, like, super concern face. So, like that whole, I'm torn now. Is it my place to jump in here and really argue the point? And what am I actually going to try to argue? So they launch the nukes. Xavier is now stuck inside Magneto's head. They're both comatose. And Magneto has forgotten his memories. And Xavier's trying to bring him back and trying to heal the pain that he's carried with him ever since he was a child, because of being a survivor of the Holocaust. And he keeps trying to, talk to him about their friendship, and he eventually remembers who Xavier is, but then he remembers that Xavier hurt him, and that all these other people have hurt him, And Xavier's trying to tell him, Magnus, you're not the only one that carries this kind of pain with you. Everyone has this kind of pain over something. Yes, yours is more extreme because you've seen some shit, but everyone is like this, and that you need to empathize with them, and you need to understand where they're coming from, and all this kind of stuff. Meanwhile, Bastion is on board wreaking havoc, and they're all fighting, and finally the missiles hit and take out the gravity well. And they try to convince Bastion again, because Cyclops is like, no, stop fighting him. Like, we're going to try to actually live up to the Professor's dream here and do what we keep saying humanity needs to do. We're going to be better. And he's like, Bastion, come with us, basically because he finally understands, that Bastion didn't choose any of this. I mean, somewhere along the way he's made some choices, but he's ultimately a product of what he is. And Cyclops tries to convince him to try to be better, to rise above, to change. And Bastion doesn't seem to go for it, but then he's like, why should I? He's like, these people would rather destroy themselves just to spite us. And he says us, or we, because he's finally lumped himself in with the mutants. But it comes to the same realization that that the Sentinels always come to, in that humanity, from their perspective, humanity built them to protect them from themselves. Because that was like the final, he's not there to save humanity. He's there to change humanity into something else. And so, just that final, it reminds me an awful lot of one of the panels in House of X, Powers of X, where they go to destroy the mother mold that's orbiting around the sun. And as they're fighting to destroy it, the mother mold tells the mutants, that the Sentinels are the children of humanity, and that they have observed their parents, the humans and the mutants, and they have found them wanting, and that they will burn in the fire that will be created by the Sentinels. And so there you see that the Sentinels hate humans too. It's just that they're the means to the end to kill the mutants first, and then they'll deal with the humans. And that's typically how the Sentinel futures work out. So that he came to that conclusion finally, but also kind of lumped himself in with the X-Men, the whole they're doing it to destroy all of us kind of comment. I don't remember his exact words. And then, the missiles hit, take out the anti-gravity thing, punch a hole in the side, and Bastion's going to be sucked out into space, and Cyclops offers his hand, and I think it appears that Bastion's going for it. And, but then I think he gets sucked out into space. So, a lot of stuff happens there on the emotional front, because again, Bastion's clearly the villain, but how much of it is him and how much of it is the fact that he was born a Sentinel? What can you do there? That's a complex enemy. So I give the show kudos for changing his background to something like this that you could really work with. But so the X-Men figure out that if they coordinate all their efforts, they might be able to stop Asteroid M from smashing into the Earth and killing all kinds of people, because it's going to hit the East Coast, and it's several miles wide. It's probably going to be a planet killer. And as they're doing all this, they realize it's not quite enough, and Xavier is getting through to Magneto, and he's like, your name's Eric Lyncher, you control magnetism. He's like, but you have another name, a name that you chose, what is that name? And he's like, Magneto, and then he comes to life, and he's like, Magneto lives, and he uses his powers to lift the asteroid M back up into space, and then it blinks out of existence. And everyone on Earth is like, well, what the hell just happened? And so then you see 6 months later, the mansion's still in ruins. No one has any idea where they are. Forge, because he was still down on Earth, and I don't remember who else, are trying to find him, but then Bishop shows up, who's notably been absent since like episode 2 or 3. And he's like, well, Forge, like, you're going to stop looking for him? It's like, because you're doing all this wrong, you're going about this the wrong way. It's like, it's not a matter of where they are, it's a matter of when they are. And Forge is like, what the hell are you talking about? And he's like, don't worry, Forge, we've had this conversation before. Like, we're good friends in the future, but we aren't there yet. And so then we see when some of them are. Some of them have gone into the year 3000 something. That's where Cyclops and Jean, I don't remember who else. The professor might be with him. It might just be Cyclops and Jean. And then a lot of the rest of them are 3,000 years ago in Egypt, which for those of you who know anything about X-Men comics, you know where this is all going now. Because those 2 points in time are very relevant to one particular villain. And yeah, so we see a bunch of raiders, fighting in some village in Egypt, and initially everyone doesn't know where the hell they are. But there's one guy that they're all fighting, and Magneto kind of sweeps them all away, and he's got a veil covering the lower half of his face. And so they're like, well, what's your name, stranger? And he takes the thing off, and he says his name is En Sabah Nur, which is the birth name of Apocalypse. So this is him before he has all of his powers. And I don't know if the others realize exactly where and when they are now. But yeah, so they've just met Apocalypse. And presumably this is while Kang, in the guise of Ramatut, controls Egypt. So then in the far future, where Apocalypse rules the world, Cyclops and Jean meet the younger version of Cable, because this is where he wound up in the future, and the mother Ascani of the Ascani clan is raising him. Well, the mother Ascani is Rachel Summers from, I believe, the Days of Future Past timeline. She's the daughter of Cyclops and Jean Grey. And she went into the far future to raise Cable. And so those two events happen, and then the credits roll, and this is the only episode I think this season that had a mid-credit scene. And you see Genosha, and you see like a kind of mechanical-ish looking blue hand reach down and scrape at the dust, and he's like something like, my children, how many of you had to die here? And then it pans back and it's Apocalypse. So that is clearly where season 2 is going to go if we're going to have a season 2. And I say if because despite insane critical acclaim for this show, and damn near everyone seems to think it's great, awesome, perfect, what have you, even the haters going into it have all basically come around to know this show really is great. Despite all that, it apparently has terrible ratings. So, I think we're going to get season 2 because they're already animating it. And I think people will come around like Andor. It's just that we have this problem of Disney has burned all the goodwill. And so even though the product is awesome, it's getting the people to come back to watch it. Kind of like Andor. Andor, greatest thing Disney's put out Star Wars related. Hardly anybody watched it. There you go. So anyway, to wrap up, the show, spectacular, worth a watch on every front. I think the only episode that might even remotely be considered a weak episode is the Mojoverse episode, but I don't consider it weak, so I think Mojo is awesome. He's a spectacularly goofy villain, but yeah, the show is great. It's like a continuation of the old series. It picks up a lot of plot threads from the old series, carries them forward. They have not undone a lot of the deaths from time travel, like Gambit, the Morlocks, let's see, who else? Madeline Pryor, Banshee, Marrow, the Sebastian Shaw, Callisto, like all kinds of people died on Genosha, and no one has gone back and changed history to reflect to not have that happen yet. Now I do expect that will happen in a later season, potentially, or I think the next season could lead into, like, they could attempt to do that, but now that Apocalypse is in play and they're at the weird ends of the timeline, they could screw things up and wind up in the Age of Apocalypse. So that's my theory as to where things are going to go, because that would definitely be I know they've been doing everything at warp speed, but that could be like half the season right there, because of just the sheer differences in that universe. But anyway, hopefully all these cameos also lead somewhere, because the significant one is Mary Jane, actually, because the Spider-Man cartoon from the 90s is canon with the X-Men cartoon. And in the end of the Spider-Man cartoon, Mary Jane was still lost somewhere in the multiverse, and Spider-Man and the Beyonder were going to find her. So the implication here is that they did. Or that happens during the brief time when there was a clone of her running around. So one of those two things is true there. And hopefully they'll resurrect the 90s Spider-Man cartoon, because it was also awesome. And hopefully they'll allow him to punch people now, since we're not on Fox anymore. But yeah, hopefully that comes out of this. Maybe resurrect the 90s Iron Man cartoon, get Force Works back in action. Yeah. So, the door's wide open. So, but I'll talk about that in the wrap-up a little bit more, some speculation there. But anyway, great show. Spectacular. Fears were totally unfounded. Yeah. Well worth a watch. Gonna be worth a rewatch, probably. I've rewatched several of these episodes, but I only got to watch this one this morning at like 3 in the morning, and it's 5 in the afternoon right now. Probably gonna go inside and watch it again here shortly. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Remember, it's YouTube. That all helps. And thank you guys for watching. And remember, welcome to the X-Men. Hope you survive the experience.